We've all seen how Donald Trump is struggling in recent polls. In fact, for several weeks in a row, Joe Biden leads in general election polls in the double digits. And when it comes to Trump's approval rating, he's not doing well either. So why is it that Republican lawmakers haven't pivoted to an anti-Trump framing when they're running their reelection campaigns? What are Republican consultants advising them on? Well, it turns out that based on what Tim Miller over at Rolling Stone found out by talking to 9 Republican consultants, they're all afraid, they're all weak, but they're definitely afraid of Donald Trump and think he's a monster. So let's start off with what Miller reports in Rolling Stone. He says that these swamp creatures were never the biggest Trumpers in the first place. His initial campaign team was an assortment of D-listers and golf course grunts rather than traditional GOP admin. So why, as Trump's numbers plummet, are these establishment rhinos continuing to debase themselves to protect someone who is politically faltering and couldn't care less about them? So again, as I mentioned, he talked to 9 different Republican consultants who are currently working on consulting various Republican candidates. None of them were willing to go on the record for obvious reasons. Once you hear their quotes, you'll know why. But first, what do they really think of Trump? Well, one consultant says, we haven't worked for anybody who seriously thinks the guy has it all together. Another Republican consultant said, I told very high-ranking people in the Trump administration that it hasn't been like this since October of 2006, when President Bush's numbers were tanking all over fallout from the Iraq War, Katrina, and the Mark Foley scandal. Another Republican consultant says every shred of evidence points to a likely ass-kicking in the fall. A different person says, well, it's as bad as it gets right now. And finally, right now, most campaigns are thanking baby Jesus every day. The election isn't held today. So that's what they really think about Donald Trump, but you wouldn't know it based on how Republican candidates are campaigning right now, but while they take the advice from these consultants.
Yeah, I love this story. Part of the reason why I was so excited about today's show, we've had so many great stories. By the way, if you want to get the whole show, tyt.com/join or hit the join button below on YouTube. So this story is great on a couple of counts. First of all, it has all the consultants and GOP strategists saying secretly what they believe, which is, of course, Trump's an idiot. But by the way, they don't necessarily disagree with him on policy, and they hate the same people that he hates. So I'm not absolving them of anything. If you read all the quotes, they're like, but I despise the media and I despise Democrats and I despise all of Trump's opponents. They leave out the racism, but that's among the people that Trump despises. So they generally agree. It's not that they don't like Trump's hatred. They just don't like how incompetent he is. They're like, God, if he was better at this, we'd all win with our hatred and it would be awesome. But he's just such a terrible manager. And so that's why they're frustrated. But the real culprit here is what nobody will talk about, Republican voters. Because the reason they cannot break from Trump is because over 80% of Republicans, even in the worst of times, right now, they're thanking baby Jesus the election isn't today, otherwise they'd get annihilated. And even now, over 80% of Republican voters say Trump or die, okay? So if you're mad about Trump or you're saying, hey, why don't these Republican politicians break from Trump? What you're actually saying is, why don't they break from their own voters? They're not gonna break from their voters. And the Republican voters are actually even more toxic, especially on the social issues and the cultural issues, than the Republican politicians and even the scumbag Republican strategist consultants. And I'm gonna get to why they're scumbags in a second if that hasn't been clear enough already, and how selfish they are. But at the end of the day, the cancer is the actual voters themselves that love Trump specifically for his hatred.
Right. So Trump's approval rating among Republican voters prior to the pandemic and the protests throughout the country was, somewhere around 96%. Because of how badly he's done in responding to various issues, he's down somewhere in the 80s, right? But that's still incredibly high among the Republican electorate. So you're right, their Republican candidates are afraid of distancing themselves too much or criticizing Trump, because that would mean that Trump would attack them and that could really hurt them with the Republican constituency. But I want to give some of the quotes from these Republican consultants, because they're refusing to advise their candidates to attack Trump in any way, despite the low approval rating overall, among all Americans. And so one Republican consultant told Rolling Stone, there are two options. You can be on this hell ship, or you can be in the water drowning. Mm-hmm. Which I think is a pretty powerful statement, because really, the Republican consultants, and the same goes for Democratic consultants, doesn't matter, consultants in politics, bottom of the barrel people for the most part, right? Like, they don't really care about the direction of the country. What they do care about is how they can benefit financially and career-wise with the direction the country's going in. So in this case, they might hate Donald Trump. They might think it's absolute hell to be a Republican consultant trying to navigate Republican campaigns in the age of Donald Trump. But they're still making money, and that's more important to them than maybe switching gears and going into a different career altogether, or maybe doing something that has at least some level of morality. One other person says, no dissent is tolerated with Trump's base, and if my candidate is going to win, it's going to be by 1 or 2% and can't afford to lose any votes on the pro-Trump flank. One other person says, my candidate didn't vote for Trump. But we're running ads right now about being a big Trump supporter, because in that district, draping yourself in Trump is still a good decision. And look, if anything, if there's anything to take away from this story, this is what I hope that I leave you guys with and that you remember. For all of the chest pumping or bumping, whatever, the nonsense about how strong the Republican Party is and how they're all about morality and principles and nonsense. No, they're all scared. They're terrified of literally the most incompetent president in American history. So one consultant told Rolling Stone, the idea of distancing from Trump, if it's discussed, is discussed very quietly. It's discussed one-on-one. You don't talk about it on a conference call. Maybe someone would, but let's just say it hasn't happened yet. And I'm on a lot of these calls. So in other words, you have to be super secretive, pull out your burner phone, don't do a conference call, make sure you don't put anything in writing because it'll come back to you. And if Trump, big bad Trump finds out, you're gonna get it. I mean, it's just, these people are pathetic.
So last couple of important things here. So first of all, they're not wrong in their calculation. I need you guys to understand this. So if number one, if they pulled away from Trump too early, they would get primaried and lose their primary. That's just basic math. If over 80% of Republicans support Trump, no matter what he does, and during the primaries it was over 90%, they would have lost, and a lot of them did lose if they just deviated a couple of, just a shade, a couple of inches away from Donald Trump. And that there's a graveyard full of Republican so-called moderates who was actually massive right wingers, but who said, yeah, but Trump looks a little stupid, doesn't he? You're a gunner. So they're all lobbyists and retired now. So there's good reason for them not to deviate, but it's not just the primaries, guys. In the general election, the way that Republicans win is by getting much bigger voter turnout than Democrats, historically. So if you criticize Trump, you depress your own voter base, less of them show up to vote for you, and then you're doubly screwed and have no chance of winning. That's why that consultant was saying, if I lose 1 or 2 points from my base, I got no chance of winning. I got to try to squeak by tricking people into thinking that I'm not that pro-Trump or anti-Trump. I just got to be quiet about Trump so I could squeak by. Now that leads me to my huge criticism of the press. The press knows that these consultants and all these politicians are scum, that they purposely lie to you in every conceivable way not in order to inform you, but in order to trick you. But they never say it. They never say, oh, well, your Republicans are great and they're moderate Republicans. And Susan Collins disagrees. And look at this person and the brave Republican and Chuck Grassley and blah, 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 blah. No. They're all doing this calculation. Why isn't every political article about what political reality is, as opposed to the theater that these consultants are presenting? The press credulously covers the theater as if it's real. And that's what hurts the country the most. And I'll end on this quote because it is so telling about consultants. And Anna's right, as I'm reading this quote to you, it's not just Republican. Democratic consultants think the same exact way. So listen to what one guy said. If you actually think about this very selfishly, if Trump loses, I make more money. He loses, we go back to a semi-normal Republican Party that leaves more populist than I think a lot of people would like. We get to run all these challenger races and probably take back in 2 years. Maybe even gains on the state level because of the extremist Democrat administration. I make more money. So that's a very selfish view, and people have talked about that. So what he's saying is, I don't care if the leader of my party wins or loses. All I care about is making more money. Later, we'll pretend we weren't with Trump. And later, we'll lie to you in a different way. And the press will play along and we'll get all the money anyway. And for Democrats, the equal and opposite of that is, we don't care if Donald Trump wins. If Donald Trump wins, we make even more money, raising more money to oppose the boogeyman. And I take 15% of that money. So their Democratic consultants are thrilled that Trump won. They made so much more money because of it. So this is the sick game that's being played on all of us. And yet the press is almost completely mute on it. When you sign up for a spend and save account at aspiration.com/TYT, we will plant 10 trees. Let's save the planet together.